if you create like a sharing rule, we saw, for example, the time went from 15 minutes down to 3 minutes in one of our tests. And that's where I'm getting the 5x improvement from.
Hello, everyone. I hope you're having an amazing day. I am here with Larry Tung, who is the product manager for record access and sharing. Hey, Larry, how's it going?
It's going pretty good, Susannah. Thank you.
It's really exciting for a number of reasons. Well, we have TDX coming up, but we also have so much change that's happening with how sharing works at Salesforce. So I want to ask you, what do architects need to know about these changes happening?
Architects should know perhaps three things. First, restriction rules. Second, sharing hierarchy. And a third feature called faster account sharing recalculations.
So I want to ask you more about the first one. So you talked about restriction rules. Those are relatively new in the space. So I wonder, when is the use case for, maybe you go public read only, like we mentioned in well architected, right? That's a recommendation. Does this allow us to go that route versus locking everything down with private? Like, what's maybe the use case for using restriction rules, or what are some limitations that exist for restriction rules today?
Restriction rules, part of it was when you set the organization-wide default to private for tasks, events, and contracts, it doesn't quite make it private. It's very misleading in a sense. We say it's private, but it's not. And what we've seen is if you can access the account, you can see all the tasks, events, and contracts on that account. And so with restriction rules, you can further restrict access. And going back to what we see in well architected, I think it's a really important call out. A lot of architects might just choose private because they, for whatever reasons, want to say, hey, we know there's potentially sensitive information here. But as well architected kind of illustrates between the different options, there's some drawbacks of using a private organization-wide default. For example, as an administrator, you may need to create different sharing rules and continually maintain that. So there's definitely a cost there. So with restriction rules, I think the one gotcha is not available on all standard objects yet. I'm really partnering with other product managers that own the account, contact case, and opportunity, and hoping that they're going to add support for restriction rules in the future. But in the meantime, for custom objects and for the objects we do support, you're right. It's an opportunity to perhaps keep the org-wide default as public read-write or even read-only, and then adding a restriction rule that further restricts access just for that group of users who need their access restricted.
That's great. It's great. And you mentioned something as well around the faster recalculation of records. I read a little bit about this earlier, and I know that it very directly relates to implicit sharing. So tell us more about that.
Okay. So implicit sharing, that one, I want to make a future video because it is somewhat challenging to explain. Let's just say that when you set up access for account, you also can choose the access for opportunities, cases, and contacts as long as the org-wide default is not public read-write or controlled by parent. And so in these situations where you're saying, I'm not the account owner, or I'm getting access to this account, but what should my access be to all of the related opportunities, contacts, and cases? And as you set that, we currently store that information in the share tables, and that's what we call implicit child shares. And what we've seen is that depending on how much volume in terms of implicit shares you have, that correlates with the specific performance boost. And so we've seen in our own testing 3x or more improvement in our own test scenarios. And then we even turned this on for our own org. And we have one of the largest, maybe embarrassing to say, one of the largest implicit child shares in all of Salesforce. And we saw a 5x improvement. I can't guarantee that your org will receive a 5x performance for sharing recalcs and when you're doing a big realignment for certain operations. But if you create like a sharing rule, we saw, for example, the time went from 15 minutes down to 3 minutes in one of our tests. And that's where I'm getting the 5x improvement from. So again, based on your org shape, your mileage may vary But it is a really neat feature that I would highly recommend customers consider.
Definitely. And it's really interesting, I think, from an architectural perspective, because you're changing the way you store these records in the share table, but users aren't going to see any like effect, even though we're not storing it in those sharing tables. Still, the way that the sharing opens up works the same for the end user, correct?
Right. There's one little gotcha. Check the release notes. It's all about high volume portal users, but frankly, we're actually fixing and making that behavior more consistent and what customers expect. So to me, that's kind of a nice bonus.
Nice. Yeah, it seems like all of these changes are moving towards like a more advanced, more future-looking way of getting record access. That's very exciting. So if folks are interested in learning more, where should architects go?
I think the well-architected, I mean, not to brag about the stuff that your team owns, but I've read it. I really like the well-architected secure page. There's also some other additional material that Cheryl Feldman and I have been working on. There's a future of user management Trailblazer group. Cheryl's also posted some really neat features around user access policies. So if you haven't seen that, Cheryl and I show that in the Dreamforce Winter 23 Release Readiness Live. Finally, I'd love to meet you. If you come into TDX, I have a roadmap session on where we're going with record access. And we also have another session that's talking about the least privilege and how we set that up. So it's a 20-minute session that we'd love to see and meet you in person.
Awesome. Yeah, I will plug that second session as well. So you'll be joined with Matt Hamlin, I believe. And it's a session that is going to be on day 2 of TrailblazerDX in the Willow Theater. So if you're going to be there in person, absolutely come check it out. It's going to be amazing. And it'll also be streamed on Salesforce Plus, and they're on Salesforce Plus for you on demand. So even if you can't join us in San Francisco in March, definitely check that out. So thank you so much for your time, Larry. We'll both get back to preparing our content for TDX. I know that's one of those things we're working on very diligently these next couple of days. But in the meantime, have a great day. And yeah, thanks again for joining us.